Introduction. Why start with why? There is a naturally occurring pattern, a distinct way of thinking, acting, and communicating that endows certain leaders with the remarkable ability to inspire those around them, while it might appear that these individuals were simply born with an innate predisposition to lead and captivate. This profound ability is by no means an exclusive gift reserved for a chosen few. It is a pattern that can be learned, practiced, and mastered. With a degree of discipline, any leader and any organization can cultivate the capacity to inspire others, rallying people both internally and externally to help advance their grandest ideas and visions. We all possess the potential to truly lead. The purpose of this exploration is not to dwell on the broken systems or to offer mere fixes for the things that are failing. Instead, this is a guide designed to shine a light on and amplify the principles that genuinely work. There is no intention to discard or upset the valid solutions offered by others. Indeed, most answers grounded in sound evidence have their place. However, a fundamental issue arises when we begin by asking the wrong questions. If the root cause is not deeply understood, then even the most seemingly correct answers will ultimately steer us off course. The truth has a way of revealing itself in time. The narratives that follow belong to those rare individuals and organizations that naturally embody this inspiring pattern, those who inherently understand that everything must begin with a profound sense of purpose. Imagine a scenario where the goal is incredibly ambitious, public interest is surging, experts are lining up to contribute, and funding is abundant. This was the exact landscape in the early 1900s for Samuel Pierpont Langley, a man armed with every conceivable ingredient for success. As he set out to be the first to pilot an airplane, Langley was a highly regarded senior officer at the Smithsonian Institution and a former mathematics professor at Harvard. His social circle included some of the most powerful and affluent men of his era, such as Andrew Carnegie and Alexander Graham Bell. Furthermore, he was backed by a massive $50,000 grant from the War Department, an astronomical sum at the time. He assembled a veritable dream team of the day's brightest minds, utilized the finest materials available, and enjoyed relentless, glowing press coverage. The entire nation watched with bated breath, certain that his success was guaranteed. Yet, a few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright were quietly working on their own flying machine. They had no government grants, no high-level connections, and zero funding. Not a single person on their team possessed an advanced degree or even a basic college education. What the Wright brothers did possess, however, was an intense, all-consuming passion to fly. This passion was so palpable that it inspired the unwavering commitment of a dedicated group operating out of a humble bicycle shop. On December 17, 1903, a small crowd witnessed history as a man took flight for the very first time. The Wright brothers succeeded where a significantly better equipped, better funded, and better educated team had failed. It was not a matter of luck or superior work ethic, as both teams were highly motivated and scientifically minded. They pursued the exact same objective, but only the Wright brothers possessed the ability to truly inspire those around them, leading a team to develop a technology that would forever alter the course of humanity. Decades later, a different kind of revolution was brewing. In the mid-1970s, following an era marked by intense anti-establishment sentiment and fierce protests, a new generation of revolutionaries sought to change the way the world operated. They did not take up arms against an authoritarian regime. Instead, they chose to beat the system at its own game. For Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, the battlefield was the business world, and their weapon of choice was the personal computer. At the time, computers were immensely complicated, outrageously expensive, and viewed strictly as corporate tools. But Wozniak envisioned a much nobler, empowering purpose for the technology. He saw the personal computer as the ultimate equalizer, a way for the average individual to harness the same functional power as a massively resourced corporation. Wozniak engineered the Apple I and Apple II to be simple and affordable, but even the most brilliant invention is meaningless if no one adopts it. That was where 21-year-old Steve Jobs stepped in. Jobs wanted to make a significant dent in the universe, and building a company was his chosen vehicle to ignite that revolution. In just their first year, with a single product, they generated $1 million in revenue. By year 4, sales hit $100 million, and within 6 years, Apple Computer was a billion-dollar enterprise. Yet, it was not their rapid growth or their intelligence that made Apple truly extraordinary. What set them apart was their unparalleled ability to repeat this pattern of challenging conventional thinking across multiple, vastly different industries, from personal computers to music to mobile phones. Consider another profound example of this pattern in action. Martin Luther King Jr. was not the only person who suffered the injustices of a pre-civil rights America. Nor was he the only charismatic orator of his time. However, he possessed a unique, defining gift. He knew how to inspire people. He understood that enacting real, lasting change required far more than eloquent speeches or the efforts of a small group of allies. It required tens of thousands of average citizens, united by a singular, compelling vision. On August 28, 1963, without the aid of modern technology, mass emails, or a sprawling website, 250,000 people arrived in Washington, D.C. at exactly the right time to hear the words that would echo through history. Dr. King was able to mobilize a nation to change not just for the benefit of a marginalized few, but for the fundamental good of all. Apple is not the leading manufacturer of home computers by market share, yet it leads its industry and dictates the direction of several others. Martin Luther King Jr.'s experiences were not unique, yet he led a movement that transformed a nation. The Wright brothers were the underdogs of aviation, yet they ushered us into a new era of flight. Their respective goals were not vastly different from those of their peers, and the systems they used could easily be replicated. Yet these individuals and organizations stand completely apart from the norm. The ability to simply motivate people is not inherently difficult. It is usually achieved by tying behavior to an external factor, offering tempting incentives, or employing the threat of punishment. Many successful corporations have dominated their industries for decades through highly effective motivation and manipulation, but great leaders operate on an entirely different plane. They do not merely motivate, they inspire. They provide people with a profound sense of purpose and belonging that has absolutely nothing to do with external incentives. Those who are truly inspired are driven by a deeply personal motivation. They willingly pay premiums, endure inconveniences, and act for the good of the whole, not because they are obligated to, but because they inherently want to. These uniquely influential leaders and organizations, whether it is Harley-Davidson, Disney, Southwest Airlines, or figures like John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, all share a common thread. Regardless of their size, era, or industry, they think, act, and communicate in the exact same manner, and it happens to be the complete opposite of everyone else. Imagine a world where this ability to inspire is not the rare exception, but the prevailing majority. Studies indicate that a vast majority of people do not have their dream jobs and do not wake up feeling fulfilled. If more individuals understood how to build organizations that inspire, we could reverse this reality, creating an economy where trust, loyalty, and fulfillment are the norm. This exploration is not about dictating a course of action. It is about uncovering the root cause of action. For those open to a new perspective and seeking to create enduring, meaningful impact, the challenge is clear. Chapter 1. Assume you know picture a frigid day in January. A man, merely 43 years of age, is officially inaugurated as the chief executive of his nation. Standing beside him is his predecessor, a celebrated military general who, a decade and a half prior, had led his country's armed forces in a conflict that ended in the defeat of Germany. This newly minted youthful leader had been raised within the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church. Following his swearing in, he spends the next 5 hours observing grand parades staged in his honor, celebrating the monumental occasion late into the night, finally resting at 3 o'clock the next morning. If asked to identify this historical figure, the mind naturally gravitates toward an iconic American president. Yet, the date is January 30th, 1933, and the man being described is Adolf Hitler, not John F. Kennedy. This historical bait-and-switch perfectly illustrates a fundamental human flaw. We constantly make assumptions. Our perception of the world is perpetually constructed upon information that is frequently incomplete or entirely false. In this scenario, the details provided were intentionally selective. They mirrored the biography of John F. Kennedy so closely that the mind, desperate for pattern recognition, confidently leaped to a conclusion. It only took the revelation of a single minor detail, the specific date, to completely shatter that assumption. This tendency is profoundly significant because our assumptions, these perceived truths, directly dictate our behavior. We navigate our lives and construct our strategies based on what we are convinced we understand. Consider an era not so deeply buried in the past when the prevailing consensus maintained that the Earth was flat. This was not merely an idle philosophical belief, it was a perceived truth that fundamentally constricted human behavior. Exploration was practically non-existent. Seafarers and merchants harbored a genuine terror that venturing too far into the unknown would result in plummeting off the edge of the world. Consequently, humanity remained largely stationary. It was only when a singular, seemingly minor detail was universally accepted, the reality that the planet is a sphere, that human behavior transformed on an unprecedented global scale. With this new, accurate foundation of knowledge, societies began to boldly traverse the oceans. Intricate trade routes were forged, exotic spices were exchanged, and complex concepts like mathematics transcended cultural borders. A torrent of innovation and advancement was unleashed. The simple correction of a universally held false assumption propelled the entire human race forward. When we examine the modern landscape of business and leadership, we must ask ourselves how organizations are truly built and how pivotal decisions are genuinely made. Do we truly possess a granular understanding of why certain organizations thrive while others falter? Or are we simply operating on another set of grand assumptions? Regardless of how one defines success, whether it means reaching a specific stock valuation, accumulating wealth, hitting a quarterly revenue target, earning a coveted promotion, launching a startup, solving a social crisis, or securing a political victory, the methodology we employ to reach these destinations is remarkably uniform. While some individuals rely purely on instinct and improvisation, the vast majority attempt to gather a foundational layer of data to formulate educated decisions. This data collection can be highly structured, involving exhaustive market research, focus groups, and statistical polling. Alternatively, it might be entirely informal, relying on the anecdotal advice of trusted colleagues or drawing upon the well of one's own historical experiences. Regardless of the specific mechanism, the underlying desire remains constant to make an informed, educated choice. More crucially, the ultimate objective is to make the correct choice. Yet, experience repeatedly demonstrates that decisions frequently unravel, irrespective of the sheer volume of data meticulously collected. Sometimes the fallout from these miscalculations is trivial, a minor inconvenience easily swept aside. At other times, the consequences are utterly catastrophic. Irrespective of the final outcome, the core issue remains the same. We construct our decisions upon a perception of reality that may lack fundamental accuracy, just as one might have confidently wagered money on the assumption that the earlier biography described John F. Kennedy. We routinely bet the futures of our organizations on perceived truths. We remain absolutely certain we are right until a critical, overlooked detail shatters that certainty. The danger of false assumptions extends beyond outright failures. Even when strategies succeed, we are often quick to attribute that success to a specific cause, but do we genuinely understand the mechanics behind the victory? Achieving a desired outcome once does not guarantee the ability to replicate it indefinitely. Consider the casual investor who occasionally strikes gold in the stock market. When his portfolio flourishes, he is quick to credit his own unparalleled intellect and flawless analytical foresight. Conversely, when his investments tank, the blame is swiftly outsourced to the unpredictable whims of the market. This dual logic cannot hold. The outcomes, both positive and negative, must either be the result of his own calculated prescience and subsequent blindness, or they are entirely the product of capricious luck. They cannot be both. This raises a critical conundrum. How can an organization guarantee that its decisions will consistently generate optimal results for reasons that remain entirely within its deliberate control? The conventional, logical response dictates that the accumulation of more information is the ultimate key. We gorge on data. We devour business literature, pack into industry conferences, absorb endless podcasts, and constantly solicit external counsel, all driven by the frantic need to discover more, so we can finally figure out exactly what to do. The inherent flaw in this approach is that we have all found ourselves drowning in a sea of data, surrounded by impeccable advice, only to watch our meticulously crafted plans derail. Perhaps the positive impact was fleeting, or an unforeseen variable blindsided the entire operation. Returning to the historical anecdote, the specific biographical details provided applied equally to both Adolf Hitler and John F. Kennedy. The narrative could have seamlessly shifted to either man. This serves as a stark warning to be deeply suspicious of what we believe we know. Assumptions, even those fortified by rigorous empirical research, possess the power to lead us dramatically astray. Intuitively, we recognize this vulnerability. We inherently grasp that when mountains of analytics and expert counsel fail to produce the expected result, it is almost certainly because we overlooked a single, seemingly insignificant, yet absolutely vital detail. When this happens, our default reaction is to retreat to our data sources, perhaps commission new studies, reevaluate our options, and initiate the entire grueling cycle once more. However, piling on more data is a futile exercise if the entire mechanism was set into motion by a fundamentally flawed assumption. There are deeply influential factors that must be acknowledged, forces that operate entirely outside the realm of our rational, analytical, data-obsessed minds. We have all experienced moments where data was completely absent, or where we actively chose to disregard the prevailing expert advice, opting instead to follow a visceral gut feeling. And often, these intuitive leaps yield results that are not merely adequate, but vastly exceed expectations. This intricate, unpredictable dance between gut instinct and rational, data-driven analysis essentially defines the entirety of how we conduct commerce and navigate our lives. We can spend an eternity slicing and dissecting every conceivable option, but when the dust settles on the empirical evidence, we are still faced with the original dilemma. How do we define and execute a course of action that produces a desired, repeatable effect? How do we attain perfect foresight? A compelling metaphor for this challenge can be found in the contrasting manufacturing philosophies of the American and Japanese automotive industries. Decades ago, a delegation of American auto executives toured a Japanese assembly plant. As they observed the final stages of the production line, they noticed the car doors being attached to their hinges, a process seemingly identical to their own. However, a crucial element was absent. In American factories, a line worker was specifically employed to wield a rubber mallet, methodically tapping the edges of the newly attached doors to force them into a perfect fit. In the Japanese facility, this role simply did not exist. Perplexed, the American executives inquired as to when, exactly, the Japanese workers ensured the doors fit perfectly. The Japanese guide responded with a knowing smile, explaining that the doors were engineered to fit perfectly during the initial design phase. The Japanese auto plant did not wait for a problem to manifest at the end of the assembly line, only to apply a reactive, data-driven solution. They engineered the exact outcome they desired from the very beginning of the process. They understood that any failure to achieve that perfect outcome was the direct result of a flawed decision made at the starting line. Ultimately, the doors on both the American and Japanese vehicles appeared to fit seamlessly when they rolled off the floor. Yet the Japanese manufacturer eliminated the need to pay a worker to hammer the metal, nor did they bear the cost of purchasing the mallets themselves. More profoundly, the doors designed to fit from their inception were inherently more durable and structurally sound in the event of a collision. This superiority was achieved for no other reason than the absolute commitment to ensuring the pieces belonged together from the start. The American reliance on the rubber mallet serves as a potent metaphor for how the vast majority of individuals and organizations attempt to lead. When confronted with an outcome that deviates from the master plan, they deploy a rapid-fire succession of perfectly effective, short-term tactical fixes until the superficial appearance of the desired result is achieved. But how structurally sound are these reactive solutions? An alarming number of organizations exist purely in a world of tangible short-term goals, constantly wielding their metaphorical rubber mallets to force the pieces into place. Conversely, the organizations that achieve monumental success, those that extract maximum impact from minimal resources, and those that wield a disproportionate level of cultural and market influence, operate on an entirely different paradigm. They construct their products, build their corporate cultures, and recruit their personnel based on a profound, original intention. Even though the superficial final outcome might look identical to that of their mallet-wielding competitors, truly great leaders comprehend the immeasurable value of the elements that remain invisible to the naked eye. Every directive issued, every strategic course charted, and every objective targeted originates from a single fundamental action, a decision. The world is divided between those who decide to retroactively manipulate the door until it fits, and those who begin from a place of profound, intentional design. While both methodologies may occasionally produce similar short-term appearances, it is the invisible foundation, the unseen intention, that makes enduring, long-term success entirely predictable for only one of these paths. True leadership belongs to those who understand that the doors must be designed to fit by intention rather than hammered into place by default. Chapter 2. Carrots and Sticks. There is scarcely a product or service available today that cannot be purchased from a competitor for roughly the same price, at a similar level of quality, and with comparable features, even if an organization manages to secure a genuine first-mover advantage. That edge is routinely lost within a matter of months as the market rapidly replicates the innovation. Yet, when the leaders of these organizations are asked why their customers remain loyal, they almost universally point to those same commoditized attributes: superior quality, better features, or competitive pricing. This reveals a stark and fascinating reality. Most organizations have absolutely no idea why their customers choose them, nor do they understand why their own employees choose to work for them. Operating on such fundamentally flawed assumptions leaves leaders relying on a limited arsenal to influence human behavior. Ultimately, there are only two ways to drive action. You can inspire it, or you can manipulate it. Manipulation is not necessarily a malicious endeavor. It is a remarkably common and deeply ingrained facet of human interaction, echoing the playground negotiations of children, trading favors for friendship. In the adult realms of business, marketing, and politics, these tactics are ubiquitous. Organizations that lack a clear sense of their foundational purpose rely disproportionately on manipulations, dropping prices, running promotions, exploiting fear, appealing to aspirations, leveraging peer pressure, and promising novelty. They rely on these tactics for one very compelling reason: they work. Among these mechanisms, manipulating the price is perhaps the most irresistible. It is a highly effective way to drive immediate business. If a price is dropped low enough, the inventory will inevitably move. But for the seller, this strategy functions exactly like a narcotic. The short-term high of a sales spike is euphoric, but the more the tactic is employed, the harder it becomes to break the addiction. Once a consumer base is conditioned to expect a discount, convincing them to pay a premium later is nearly impossible. The seller is then trapped in a brutal downward spiral, forced to continually slash margins just to stay competitive, fundamentally transforming their unique offering into a mere commodity. While a rare giant like Walmart might leverage sheer immense scale to survive and dominate this price game, it does so at a severe cost to its corporate reputation, constantly battling the scandals born from its relentless drive to keep operational costs at rock bottom. A similar toll is exacted through the heavy use of promotions. In the latter half of the 20th century, as legacy automakers like General Motors faced aggressive new competition, they unleashed massive cashback incentives to maintain their market dominance. For a time, the strategy appeared brilliant, successfully reversing declining sales. Yet, beneath the surface, it was quietly devastating their profit margins and conditioning the consumer to believe that paying full price was a fool's errand. When the financial reality of losing hundreds of dollars per vehicle forced the scaling back of these incentives, the buyers vanished. This manipulative ethos permeates the broader retail landscape through value-added propositions and complex rebate structures. The industry actively relies on metrics like breakage and slippage, calculating the precise percentage of consumers who will fail to navigate the deliberately cumbersome rebate processes, effectively allowing the seller to profit from the customer's inconvenience while maintaining the illusion of a discount. When not dangling a financial carrot, manipulators frequently wield the stick of fear. It is arguably the most potent emotional trigger available, bypassing rational thought to tap directly into our primal biological survival instincts. A bank robber needs only the suggestion of a concealed weapon to command total compliance. In the corporate and political arenas, the weapon is the dread of missing out, of failing, or of personal peril. The procurement officer who chooses the safe, established brand over a superior, lesser-known alternative does so simply out of fear for his job security. Public service campaigns use terrifying imagery of fried eggs and fatal crashes to deter drug use or promote safety, while health and insurance advertisements prey on our deepest insecurities about mortality. When fear is the primary motivator, facts become entirely incidental. The perceived threat, whether real or completely fabricated, drives the behavior. Conversely, aspirational messages tempt us toward a highly desired state, offering the seductive illusion of a shortcut to success, fitness, or wealth. These messages are intoxicating to those who harbor nagging insecurities or lack the discipline to achieve their goals independently. A gym membership is effortlessly sold with the promise of 6 easy steps to a happier life, yet true physical transformation requires the grueling, unglamorous reality of consistent daily discipline. This dynamic plays out equally in the corporate world, where management frequently chases the alluring, quick-fix system over the difficult, long-term structural changes required for genuine growth. It is a persistent, exhausting cycle of attempting to satisfy long-term desires with short-term, unsustainable responses. Compounding these desires is the heavy weight of peer pressure. Advertising constantly reminds us that a majority of experts or 1 million satisfied customers prefer a specific path. We are subtly coerced into believing that the majority must inherently possess superior knowledge, sparking a deep-seated fear that we might be wrong if we do not conform. This is further amplified by celebrity endorsements, where the fame of an athlete or actor is inexplicably tethered to the value of a bank, a car, or a watch. We are urged to align our choices with the famous and the majority, pressured into compliance not by the objective merit of the choice, but by the sheer gravitational pull of the crowd. Then there is the persistent promise of the new. We are constantly lured by novelty, which is all too often cleverly disguised as innovation. A mobile phone manufacturer might release a sleek, ultra-thin device, sparking a massive cultural frenzy and soaring sales. Yet within a few short years, competitors mimic the aesthetic, the stock plummets, and the company is once again fighting for basic relevance. Adding a camera to a phone or introducing the 30-second variation of a toothpaste brand is not true innovation. It is merely a shiny new feature designed to momentarily distract and stimulate a trial purchase. True innovation fundamentally alters the trajectory of an industry or society as the light bulb or the microwave oven did. Novelty simply adds to the noise, commoditizing the market until the consumer is paralyzed by an overwhelming, indistinguishable array of choices. The inescapable danger of all these manipulative tactics is that they are undeniably effective at driving transactions. But a transaction is fundamentally different from a relationship. Manipulations cannot and do not breed loyalty. Repeat business occurs when a customer returns out of habit or continuous incentivization. True loyalty is the willingness to turn down a better price or a objectively superior product to continue doing business with a specific entity. The modern economy has become profoundly addicted to these short-term behavioral fixes. The cost is an exponential rise in stress for both the buyer, who is paralyzed by infinite, heavily marketed choices, and the seller who wakes up every day burdened with the exhausting task of inventing the next promotional gimmick just to stay relevant. For a business model based purely on single, isolated transactions, like a cash-for-gold broker or a police reward for a fugitive, carrots and sticks are perfectly appropriate. If there is no expectation of a lasting relationship, manipulation is highly efficient. But for any organization seeking enduring support, whether it is a brand seeking lifelong customers or a leader seeking a devoted constituency, relying on manipulations is a fatal miscalculation. When economic tides turn and the capital required to fund continuous promotions dries up, the absence of a loyal foundation is disastrous. Loyal followers are the ones who support an organization during the darkest times, driven by a profound sense of shared purpose, rather than the promise of a temporary discount. The pervasive use of manipulations has normalized a toxic environment of perpetual stress and short-sighted decision-making. The devastating economic collapses witnessed in the housing and banking sectors were the logical, inevitable conclusions of systems built entirely on a foundation of short-term incentives, fear, and instant gratification. When behavior is driven solely by the pursuit of the next bonus or the fear of immediate failure without any grounding in a higher cause or belief, the structural integrity of the entire organization eventually buckles. We have become a culture manipulated by the very systems we built. Yet, amidst this landscape of carrots and sticks, a powerful, enduring alternative perspective exists. Part 2. An alternative perspective. Chapter 3. The Golden Circle. There is a hidden symmetry in the universe, an underlying order that brings proportion and logic to everything from the fractal patterns of a fern leaf to the sprawling geometry of our cities. This pursuit of fundamental order has driven human inquiry for centuries, yielding profound mathematical and philosophical discoveries like the golden ratio, which offers a mathematical formula for aesthetic perfection. Yet, while we possess formulas to understand the physical and visual world, we have historically lacked a comparable framework to understand the unpredictable, often chaotic realm of human behavior. A remarkably simple, yet profoundly powerful concept exists that provides this missing structure. It is a framework that explains why some organizations and individuals are able to inspire incredible loyalty and drive immense action, while others, armed with identical resources, struggle to make an impact. This framework is not a complex, multi-layered matrix. It is a simple target comprised of 3 concentric rings. It is called the Golden Circle. At the very center of this circle lies the concept of why. Encircling that is a ring representing how, and the outermost ring represents what. These 3 simple layers provide an elegant, profound lens through which we can observe how human beings communicate, lead, and make decisions. To understand the immense power of this concept, one must first dissect each layer, moving from the most obvious to the most elusive. Every single organization on the face of the planet, regardless of size or industry, knows precisely what they do. This is the outermost ring of the Golden Circle. This is the tangible, easily identifiable output of their labor. A company can readily list the products it manufactures, the services it provides, or the specific functions it performs within the market. Employees can clearly define their job titles and describe their daily tasks. The what is never a mystery. It is objective, factual, and requires absolutely no philosophical depth to articulate. Depth. Moving one ring inward, we arrive at the how. Some companies and individuals understand how they do what they do. In the lexicon of modern business, these are often referred to as differentiating value propositions, proprietary processes, or unique selling points. The how is the articulation of the methods and practices that supposedly make a product or service superior to the competition. It is the explanation of an organization's unique methodology, the careful engineering behind a product, or the specific culture that governs a workforce. The how is frequently used to explain why a particular offering is better, faster, or more efficient than the rest. However, when we reach the absolute center of the circle, clarity vanishes. Very few people and even fewer organizations can clearly and compellingly articulate why they do what they do. To be clear, making a profit is not a why. Revenue and wealth are results, the necessary fuel to keep the engine running, but they are never the root motivation. The why is the deepest, most fundamental purpose. It is a cause, a core belief. It answers the ultimate questions. Why does this organization exist in the first place? Why does the founder get out of bed every morning, completely ignoring the countless other easier paths available? And most importantly, why should anyone else in the world care? Because the what is so painfully obvious and the why is so incredibly abstract, the vast majority of organizations communicate from the outside in. They begin with the clearest, most tangible element and move toward the fuzziest. They tell the world exactly what they do. They explain how they do it differently or better, and then they expect a specific behavior in return, a purchase, a vote, a signed contract. Imagine if a revolutionary technology company communicated like an ordinary corporation, and their message would follow this standard outside-in trajectory. We make great computers. They are beautifully designed, simple to use, and exceptionally user-friendly. Want to buy one? This pitch is entirely factual. It accurately describes the what and the how. It is also completely uninspiring. It lacks emotional resonance. It simply presents a list of features and expects a rational transaction to follow. This is how the vast majority of commerce is conducted, resulting in a marketplace defined by relentless, exhausting competition based purely on price, features, and temporary promotional manipulations. Now, reverse the flow of information. The truly inspiring leaders and organizations, those who command absolute devotion and reshape entire industries, communicate from the inside out. They start at the very center of the golden circle. They begin with the BUHY. When that same revolutionary technology company communicates from the inside out, the message transforms entirely. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. And we just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? The difference is not merely semantic. It is a seismic shift in perspective and impact. By reversing the order of the information, the organization does not just sell a product, it champions a belief. People are not drawn to the organization because of the functional utility of the what. They are drawn to it because they share the profound conviction of the why. The products simply become the tangible proof, the physical manifestation of that shared belief. This reveals a fundamental, unyielding truth of human behavior. People do not buy what you do, they buy why you do it. When a company's why is perfectly clear, its products are no longer viewed as mere commodities to be compared on a spreadsheet. They become symbols. The individuals who purchase these products do not just view themselves as consumers. They view themselves as disciples of a shared cause. They are not merely completing a transaction, they are incorporating the organization's beliefs into their own identity. This is the genesis of genuine, unshakable loyalty. It is the reason why millions of people will wait in line for hours to purchase a device from one specific company while treating an identical device from another manufacturer with complete apathy. This leads to a crucial clarification regarding the reality of the business landscape. The profound power of the golden circle does not imply that it is the sole mechanism for achieving corporate viability. As history and the modern economy relentlessly prove, this is not the only way to succeed. It is merely one way. An organization can absolutely build a sprawling, highly profitable empire without ever knowing its why. Fortunes are amassed every day by companies operating entirely on the outer edges of the circle, relying on the blunt instruments of carrots and sticks. They can endlessly manipulate pricing, flood the market with aggressive promotions, and exploit consumer insecurities to drive massive volumes of transactions. If the objective is simply to generate short-term revenue, hit the next quarterly target, or temporarily spike a stock price, the relentless application of manipulations is undeniably effective. However, a steep, unavoidable price is paid for this type of success. Organizations built entirely on the what and the how are fundamentally fragile. They exist in a state of perpetual anxiety, constantly looking over their shoulders at competitors, forced to endlessly innovate superficial features or slash margins just to maintain their precarious position. They must constantly bribe their customers to return and bribe their employees to stay. The golden circle is not a prerequisite for making money, but it is the absolute non-negotiable foundation for creating enduring trust. It is the only way to cultivate a constituency of fiercely loyal employees and customers who will stand by an organization through economic downturns and inevitable missteps. While manipulation provides a fleeting, exhausting surge of momentum, starting with why provides a permanent, unshakable foundation for true, lasting leadership. Chapter 4. This is not opinion, this is biology. The undeniable power of the golden circle does not stem from a clever marketing strategy or a meticulously engineered management philosophy. Its roots run far deeper, bypassing the realms of psychology and sociology entirely. The profound effectiveness of starting with the UHY is, in fact, firmly grounded in the biological architecture of the human brain. When we look at a cross-section of the human brain from the top down, its structure eerily mirrors the three concentric rings of the golden circle. This is not a metaphor. It is an anatomical reality that dictates every facet of how we perceive the world, process information, and ultimately how we make decisions. The outermost layer of the brain, the neocortex, corresponds perfectly with the outermost ring of the golden circle, the what level. The neocortex is the evolutionary newcomer, the center of all our rational analytical thought. It is the region responsible for our capacity to comprehend complex data, to calculate statistics, and to formulate language. When an organization communicates from the outside in, bombarding us with facts, figures, and features, the what, it is speaking directly to the neocortex. Our brains are incredibly adept at absorbing and processing this vast stream of complicated information. We can understand exactly why a product is technically superior, or why a specific financial metric makes logical sense. Yet, despite this profound rational comprehension, this external flow of information fundamentally fails to drive human behavior. The neocortex may process the facts, but it does not hold the power to compel action. Beneath this analytical surface lie the middle two sections of the brain, collectively known as the limbic brain. This ancient, deeply submerged region corresponds precisely with the inner two rings of the golden circle, the how and the WHI. The limbic brain is the emotional core of human existence. It is the birthplace of all our deepest feelings, from the profound bonds of trust and loyalty to the primal instincts of survival. Crucially, the limbic brain is entirely responsible for driving all human behavior and all of our decision-making processes. Yet it possesses one staggering limitation. The limbic brain has absolutely no capacity for language. This biological disconnect explains a remarkably common human experience. When we are forced to articulate exactly why we feel a certain way, we inevitably struggle. The profound feeling of loving a spouse or the intense, irrational loyalty to a specific brand originates in the language-less limbic brain. When we attempt to explain these feelings, we are forcing the neocortex, the center of language, to translate the wordless impulses of the limbic system. This is why our explanations often sound hollow, resorting to rationalizations that fail to capture the true depth of the emotion. We might list our partner's positive traits. They are funny, smart, and kind, but those characteristics could apply to millions of people. The true essence of the bond remains elusive, trapped in a region of the brain that cannot speak. This brings us to a phenomenon we all instinctively recognize: the gut decision. When we say a decision simply feels right, we are not experiencing a biological anomaly in our digestive tracts. Gut decisions do not happen in your stomach. They happen in the limbic brain. When an organization communicates its why, it bypasses the analytical filters of the neocortex and speaks directly to this deep decision-making center. We feel a visceral, immediate connection to the message. Only after this profound internal alignment occurs does the neocortex spring into action, eagerly searching for the tangible whats, the features, the data, the rational evidence, to justify the decision the limbic brain has already made. Consider the alternative, the terrifying reality of operating without a clear why. When we are presented with a wealth of empirical data but lack a sense of underlying purpose, we are forced to make decisions using only the neocortex. We exhaustively analyze the pros and cons, carefully weighing every variable. Yet, despite the flawless logic, the decision often leaves us with a lingering, uncomfortable sense of doubt. We might utter the phrase, "I know what all the facts and details say, but something just feels wrong." This is the limbic brain, utterly unconvinced by the sterile data, silently rebelling against the purely rational choice. Without the ability to verbalize its dissent, it simply generates a feeling of unease. This is the hidden architecture of human influence. It is what you cannot see that truly matters. When companies attempt to win loyalty solely by manipulating price, offering promotions, or touting superior features, they are demanding that our analytical neocortex override the profound driving forces of our limbic brain. They are asking us to make a decision based entirely on the tangible, the visible, and the measurable. While this can yield short-term transactions, it fundamentally fails to forge a lasting connection. True loyalty, the kind that defies logic and ignores a lower price tag from a competitor, is born only when an organization speaks directly to the limbic brain. By starting with the WHY, a leader or an organization provides the precise emotional context required for our deepest instincts to align with their cause. They are not merely selling a product, they are offering a tangible symbol of a shared belief. The biological reality is uncompromising. People do not buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Because the part of the brain that controls our decisions simply does not understand the language of what. Chapter 5. Clarity, Discipline, and Consistency. The profound power of the Golden Circle is entirely dependent on its balance. For this framework to generate the kind of deep, inspiring impact that transforms organizations and alters human behavior, a fundamental equilibrium must be established and maintained among its three distinct layers. If any single piece is missing or misaligned, the entire structure loses its structural integrity. The journey to achieving this balance must inevitably begin at the absolute center. Before any other action is taken, there must be absolute clarity of why. It is impossible to expect a customer to feel a profound loyalty to a brand or an employee to commit deeply to an organization's mission if the leadership itself cannot clearly articulate its foundational purpose. The WHY is a belief, a deep-seated conviction that serves as the genesis for everything that follows. If the origin point is muddled, every subsequent decision and communication will inevitably be fractured. To lead, to truly inspire, one must first possess a crystalline understanding of their own driving force. Without this unyielding clarity, an organization is left drifting, forced to rely on the exhausting, unsustainable tactics of external manipulation. Once that central belief is brought into sharp, unwavering focus, the next critical element is the discipline of how. If the WHY represents the core belief, the hows are the rigorous, deliberate actions taken to realize that belief in the physical world. These are the guiding principles, the cultural values, and the operating systems that govern daily behavior. However, possessing a list of noble values is insufficient. It requires immense, unyielding discipline to hold an organization accountable to them. Many companies plaster their walls with nouns: integrity, innovation, honesty. But nouns are static. They are incredibly difficult to act upon. To truly breathe life into the how, these principles must be articulated as actionable verbs. It is not enough to simply claim integrity. One must command the organization to always do the right thing. It is not merely innovation, but rather look at the problem from a different angle. When the hows are defined as clear, actionable directives, they provide a strict framework for evaluating every potential partner, every new hire, and every strategic initiative. The discipline of how ensures that the organization never deviates from the path forged by its central belief. This rigorous discipline inevitably yields the third crucial element, the consistency of what. The whats are the tangible, measurable outcomes of the organization's efforts. They are the products rolling off the assembly line, the services rendered, the marketing campaigns launched, and the exact words spoken by the executive team. In a perfectly balanced golden circle, every single what serves as a physical, undeniable manifestation of the underlying why. It is through the absolute consistency of these tangible outputs that the outside world is able to perceive and understand the invisible underlying belief. This is the true definition of authenticity. Authenticity cannot be manufactured or purchased through a clever public relations campaign. It occurs naturally and exclusively when an organization's actions and words are in perfect, seamless alignment with its core purpose. If the whats are inconsistent, if a company claims to believe one thing but produces a product or champions a policy that directly contradicts it, the authenticity shatters, and trust is instantly eroded. Achieving this profound authenticity requires a strict adherence to the right order. The golden circle is not a menu of options to be selected at random. It is a sequential, directional flow of logic. One cannot simply start at the outside and work their way in, attempting to define a product or a service first and then retroactively constructing a philosophy to justify it is a transparent and ultimately futile exercise. The neocortex may process the features, but the limbic brain will instantly detect the dissonance. The flow must invariably move from the inside out. The belief must originate in the center, translating into disciplined action and finally manifesting in consistent, tangible results. When this exact sequence is honored, the organization stops merely selling products and begins broadcasting a deeply resonant philosophy. The peril of ignoring this sequence is profound. If you do not intimately know why you do what you do, it becomes structurally impossible to know how to proceed with any degree of long-term certainty. Without a clear central belief acting as a North Star, the guiding principles lose their context and become arbitrary rules. Without a foundational cause, every decision regarding corporate culture, hiring practices, or product development devolves into a mere guess, a reactionary tactic based on the shifting sands of market trends or the latest advice from external consultants. The organization becomes adrift, constantly reacting to the whats of its competitors because it lacks the internal compass to chart its own definitive course. It is crucial to recognize that in the short term, manipulation and inspiration can look deceptively similar. Both mechanisms are undeniably capable of driving human behavior. A massive price discount and a profound, inspiring speech might both result in a sudden surge of sales or activity. However, they are fundamentally different forces operating on entirely different timelines. Manipulation forces an action through external pressure, leveraging fear, desire, or peer pressure to extract a specific, isolated outcome. Once the pressure is removed, the behavior instantly ceases. Inspiration, conversely, draws the action out from within. It aligns the organization's belief with the individual's deeply held values, creating a powerful internal motivation that sustains itself long after any external stimulus is gone. One builds a transaction, the other builds a movement. This dynamic is perfectly illustrated by an analogy familiar to the human experience. Doing business is exactly like dating. Imagine sitting across a table on a first date. If you spend the entire evening exclusively discussing your whats, boasting about your impressive salary, the luxury car you drive, the prestige of your job title, and the prominent people you know, you are communicating entirely from the outside of the golden circle. You are presenting a factual list of features and benefits. If the person across the table is incredibly superficial, driven purely by the tangible and the immediate, this manipulative tactic might actually secure a second date. A transaction occurs, but it will absolutely never form the basis of a deep, enduring, trusting relationship. However, if you spend that same evening speaking from the inside out, sharing your deepest beliefs, your passions, the reasons you get out of bed in the morning, and the vision you hold for your life, the dynamic changes entirely. The tangible facts about your income or your vehicle become secondary, mere proof of your driven nature. By leading with your why, you give the other person the opportunity to connect with your core philosophy. This is how genuine, lasting relationships are forged, both in the intimate realm of romance and in the vast, complex arena of commerce. When this profound alignment is achieved, we reach the highest echelon of decision-making, navigating through 3 distinct degrees of certainty. When an organization communicates exclusively from the outside in, bombarding us with facts, data, and complex rational arguments, it engages our analytical neocortex. We process the information, weigh the options, and typically state, I think this is the right decision. This is the lowest degree of certainty, driven purely by calculation and always susceptible to a counter-argument backed by slightly better data. Moving one level deeper, when we bypass the data and make a purely intuitive gut decision driven by the limbic brain, we articulate it differently. We state, I feel this is the right decision. While this emotional certainty is far more powerful in driving immediate behavior, it remains frustratingly difficult to articulate or defend, often leaving us unable to explain our own convictions. However, when an organization achieves perfect harmony within the golden circle, when the is crystal clear, the how is rigorously disciplined, and the what is perfectly consistent, a profound neurological convergence occurs. We no longer rely purely on analytical thought or blind emotion. The rational data presented perfectly justifies and validates the deep, visceral feeling in our gut. The neocortex and the limbic brain are entirely aligned. In this rare and powerful state, we reach the ultimate degree of certainty. We do not just think it is right, and we do not merely feel it is right. We state unequivocally, I know it's right. This absolute, unshakable conviction is the hallmark of genuine loyalty, and it is the ultimate reward for those who have the courage and the discipline to start with why. Chapter 6. The Emergence of Trust. The atmosphere within the corporate walls of Continental Airlines during the 1980s was not merely poor, it was notoriously toxic. To suggest that the workforce was simply embarrassed by their employer would be a dramatic understatement. The employees were subjected to poor treatment, and there is a direct, unavoidable correlation in business. When leadership mistreats the staff will inevitably pass that mistreatment down the line, and the ultimate recipient of that hostility is always the customer. Throughout that decade, Continental held the bleak distinction of being the absolute worst airline in the commercial aviation industry. When Gordon Bethune took the helm as chief executive in 1994, the poisonous culture was the first thing he recognized. The workforce was surly, deeply ashamed of their affiliation with the company, and entirely devoid of the joy required to produce a quality product. In a drastically different corporate landscape, Herb Kelleher of Southwest Airlines had long been viewed as an eccentric heretic for championing the belief that a company's primary responsibility is to its employees, not its customers or shareholders. Kelleher's philosophy was simple. If you ensure the employees are genuinely happy, they will naturally ensure the customers are happy, which in turn inevitably rewards the shareholders. Gordon Bethune arrived at Continental armed with this exact same heretical conviction. Many corporate apologists might attempt to excuse Continental's abysmal culture by pointing to the company's severe financial distress during that era. It's a common, flawed logic that insists executives must prioritize absolute survival above all else, promising to address soft issues like corporate culture only after profitability has been restored. Continental was undeniably struggling, having endured Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection twice within 8 years and cycling through 10 different CEOs in a single decade. By the time Bethune arrived, the airline was hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars and ranking dead last in every conceivable performance metric. Yet, within a single year, under Bethune's leadership, the financial hemorrhage was reversed into a massive profit, and the airline was soon recognized as one of the best places to work in America. While Bethune certainly executed necessary operational changes, the most profound and monumental shift occurred in an area that defies conventional metrics. He successfully cultivated trust. Trust is not the byproduct of completing a checklist. An organization cannot manufacture trust simply by fulfilling its basic obligations or presenting a rational argument for its value. Trust is an inherently emotional experience, not a logical one. We frequently maintain trust in certain individuals or organizations even when they make significant mistakes, while we simultaneously withhold trust from others who have ostensibly done everything perfectly. A completed checklist offers no guarantees. Genuine trust only begins to materialize when we inherently feel that an individual or an organization is driven by a purpose beyond their own self-interest. With that trust comes a perception of genuine value, a value that transcends simple monetary worth. Value is, at its core, the transference of trust. You cannot forcefully convince a market that you possess value any more than you can forcefully demand their trust. It must be earned by authentically communicating and consistently demonstrating shared beliefs. When the core belief is in perfect alignment with the disciplined actions and the tangible results, trust is forged. This profound understanding of trust is precisely what separated Bethune from his predecessors. While countless executives possess the operational acumen to manage an organization, genuine leadership requires an entirely different capacity. Occupying a position of power does not automatically make someone a leader. It simply means they hold a high rank, perhaps through tenure, fortune, or political maneuvering. True leadership dictates that others choose to follow willingly, driven not by financial coercion or contractual obligation, but by a genuine desire to follow. Frank Lorenzo, a former CEO of Continental, may have held the title of leader, but he fundamentally lacked the capacity to actually lead. Lorenzo operated in an environment completely devoid of trust. He was so paranoid that he reportedly refused to drink a beverage on his own airline unless he personally broke the seal on the can. It is no surprise that a man who trusted no one was trusted by no one. Under his regime, the executive floor was a fortress, accessible only by key cards, guarded by security personnel and cameras, completely isolating leadership from the workforce. Bethune immediately dismantled this fortress, stripping away the security and instituting a genuine open-door policy. He understood that an organization is not a collection of buildings and assets. It is fundamentally a collection of human beings. He made himself incredibly accessible, frequently working alongside baggage handlers on the tarmac. He fundamentally shifted the corporate narrative from mere operational demands to a shared collective victory, recognizing the human imperative to win, a drive that motivates everyone from little league players to billionaires. Bethune aligned the company's goals with the employees' best interests. Instead of demanding clean planes for the sake of the passengers, he reminded the crew that they had to spend their entire day in that environment, and a clean workspace was simply better for them. He implemented a brilliant bonus structure tied to on-time departures, ensuring that when the company succeeded, every single employee, not just the executive brass, received a separate, tangible reward. Every action he took dismantled the every man for himself mentality, proving to the workforce that they were part of a unified family working toward a shared, meaningful victory. This profound human need for unified culture and shared belief is not a modern corporate invention. It is the very reason the human species has survived and thrived. Our success as a species was never predicated on superior physical strength. It was built entirely on our unique ability to form cultures. A culture is simply a group of individuals who congregate around a unified set of values and beliefs. When we discover others who share our fundamental view of the world, trust is instantly generated. In our ancient history, this trust allowed early humans to leave their families to hunt, confident that the community would protect their loved ones in their absence. Without that foundational trust, no individual would ever take a risk, and without risk, there is no exploration, no innovation, and no advancement. This biological drive to belong dictates our behavior today just as powerfully as it did millennia ago. We naturally gravitate toward people and environments that reflect our own internal compass. When we travel abroad, we feel an instant, irrational bond with a fellow countryman, trusting them completely because of a perceived shared culture. Similarly, different nations cultivate vastly different cultural identities. The entrepreneurial, self-reliant spirit of the American dream stands in stark contrast to the unified collective joy of the French culture. Neither is objectively superior, they are simply different. People thrive when they exist within a culture that aligns with their own internal values. A person who feels entirely out of place in one city or country might flourish spectacularly if they relocate to an environment that resonates with their personal beliefs. When we apply this biological reality to the corporate world, the implications are staggering. A company is not merely a legal entity, it is a living culture. It is a collection of individuals brought together by a shared purpose. Therefore, the ultimate objective of recruitment should never be to simply hire individuals who possess a specific necessary skill set. The goal must be to recruit individuals who already believe what the organization believes. Consider the legendary 1914 Antarctic expedition of Ernest Shackleton. Shackleton was attempting a seemingly impossible feat, traversing the harsh, unforgiving continent of Antarctica. The journey was fraught with unimaginable peril, and ultimately his ship, the Endurance, was trapped and crushed by the ice, leaving the crew stranded in the frozen wasteland for months. Yet, despite the unimaginable suffering and the sheer impossibility of their situation, there was no mutiny, no descent into madness, and miraculously, not a single member of the crew perished. This astounding outcome was not the result of sheer luck. It was the direct result of how Shackleton built his team. He did not place a conventional advertisement seeking men with a specific number of years of sailing experience or a proven ability to navigate icy waters. Instead, his advertisement famously called for men willing to undertake a hazardous journey, promising small wages, bitter cold, long months of darkness, constant danger, and doubtful safe return, offering only honor and recognition in the event of success. Shackleton did not hire for skill. He hired for a specific disposition. The only individuals who responded to that bleak description were those who possessed an indomitable spirit and a visceral attraction to insurmountable odds. He hired survivors who believed what he believed. When an organization fills its ranks with individuals who are naturally aligned with its core purpose, success becomes an organic byproduct. These individuals do not work hard because they are coerced by management. They work hard because the pursuit of the cause fulfills their own internal drive. Southwest Airlines instinctively understood this when they began recruiting cheerleaders and majorettes for flight attendant positions. They did not need to teach these individuals how to be enthusiastic or how to champion a cause. They simply hired people who naturally possessed that spirit and placed them in an environment where they could express it. You cannot hire skilled people and magically inject them with motivation. You must hire people who are already motivated and provide them with an environment that inspires them to apply their energy toward a shared vision. This profound difference in perspective is perfectly encapsulated by the parable of the two stonemasons. When the first mason is asked about his work, he describes a grueling, monotonous existence, lifting heavy stones in the scorching sun merely to earn a wage. When the second mason, performing the exact same physical labor, is asked the same question, he proudly declares that he is building a cathedral. The physical action is identical, but the internal context is entirely transformed. The second mason is not just doing a job, he belongs to a purpose. He is part of a grand vision that transcends his immediate discomfort. Organizations that clearly articulate their why cultivate a workforce of cathedral builders. These employees do not view themselves as isolated laborers. They see themselves as vital components of a unified mission, fostering a deep camaraderie that is the absolute prerequisite for true, enduring success. This internal drive, this unyielding belief in a higher purpose, is the critical factor that separates those who change the world from those who merely participate in it. Consider the race to build the first powered airplane. Samuel Pierpont Langley was armed with every conceivable advantage: prestigious academic credentials, powerful connections, immense government funding, and a team of the brightest minds money could buy. Yet his primary motivation was the acquisition of personal fame and immense wealth. He wanted the prestige of being first. Meanwhile, in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright possessed none of these advantages. They had no funding, no advanced degrees, and no high-level connections. What they possessed was a consuming, unshakable belief that powered flight would fundamentally alter the course of human history. They inspired a small team to endure failure after failure, constantly taking spare parts to the field because they fully anticipated crashing before they succeeded. When the Wright brothers finally took to the sky on December 17, 1903, they ushered in a new era of humanity. Langley, upon hearing the news, simply abandoned his project. He was not motivated by the advancement of flight, he was motivated by the desire to be a famous inventor. When that prize was lost, his drive evaporated. The most innovative ideas, the true breakthroughs that alter industries, rarely emanate from the top down. True innovation happens when the leadership provides a profound context, a clearly defined why, and then trusts the individuals on the front lines to discover new ways to bring that cause to life. Steve Jobs did not single-handedly engineer the iPod or the iPhone. He established an environment dedicated to challenging the status quo, empowering his teams to look at entrenched industries and find ways to revolutionize them. This is how a company built to challenge conventional thinking manages to continually disrupt seemingly unrelated markets. It is the exact same dynamic that allowed Southwest Airlines, when faced with the desperate need to sell an aircraft to survive, to invent the unprecedented 10-minute turnaround. They did not hire expensive consultants, they rallied their inspired workforce to solve an impossible problem, trusting them to execute it. However, when an organization loses its grip on its founding purpose, when the WHY becomes fuzzy, and the culture degrades into an arena of self-interest, the consequences are disastrous. This was the tragedy of Barings Bank, a venerable institution brought to its knees by a single rogue trader, Nick Leeson. Leeson's incredibly reckless, unauthorized trading was not a secret, but the culture at Barings had become so toxic, so deeply entrenched in a cutthroat, profit-at-all-costs mentality that a culture of silence prevailed. Employees were terrified of asking questions or challenging the status quo for fear of appearing foolish or jeopardizing their own standing. The environment was utterly devoid of mutual trust. It was a regression to the caveman mentality, every individual fighting strictly for their own survival, completely blind to the health of the broader community. When trust vanishes, the system eventually breaks down. Trust within an organization acts much like the safety net for a trapeze artist. No matter how incredibly skilled the acrobat is, they will not attempt a dangerous, untested maneuver without the psychological and physical security of the net below. The net empowers the performer to take risks, to push boundaries, and to discover new levels of excellence, knowing that a failure will not be fatal. When leadership cultivates a strong, trust-based culture, they provide that emotional net for their employees. Knowing that the organization will protect them, employees are emboldened to take calculated risks, to innovate and to exert effort that ultimately elevates the entire company. This profound level of trust is not built upon public relations statements or marketing campaigns. It is forged in the invisible spaces, in the actions taken when no one is watching. It is the kind of deep, life or death trust exemplified in the high-stakes world of military aviation. A fighter pilot hurtling through the sky at supersonic speeds relies absolutely on an intricate network of support personnel, the mechanics, the trainers, and the air weapons controllers stationed far away, staring at radar screens. Captain Laurie Robinson, an air weapons controller, understood that her job was not merely to monitor a screen. Her purpose was to clear a path for the pilots, allowing them to execute their missions with absolute confidence. When a highly decorated pilot made a fatal error during a training exercise, initially blaming Robinson, the review of the tapes proved the pilot had forgotten his reliance on the team. He had briefly forgotten the invisible infrastructure of trust that allowed him to be great. Robinson's unyielding commitment to serving those she guided eventually propelled her to the highest ranks of military leadership, not through intimidation, but through the profound trust she earned by consistently prioritizing the safety and success of others. When this level of trust permeates a culture, its influence extends far beyond the internal workings of the organization. It fundamentally alters how the outside world perceives and interacts with the entity. We inherently rely on the recommendations of those we trust. We filter our decisions through the experiences of those who share our worldview, If a company operates with absolute clarity and consistency, it earns a reputation that precedes any specific product interaction. If a parent is forced to choose between a DVD produced by an unknown entity and one produced by Disney, they will invariably choose Disney without even researching the content. They make this choice because Disney has consistently demonstrated a commitment to wholesome family entertainment. They pass what can be called the celery test. If a company's core beliefs are clear, every product they introduce, every action they take makes perfect sense to the consumer. This level of absolute clarity and trusted reputation is what ultimately triggers the phenomenon of mass market acceptance. According to the law of diffusion of innovations, an idea or a product cannot achieve widespread mainstream success by targeting the practical-minded majority. The majority will not adopt a new behavior or purchase a revolutionary product till it has been vetted and championed by the early adopters, those individuals who are driven by their gut, who share the foundational belief of the creator, and who are willing to endure inconvenience or pay a premium to prove what they believe. To cross the chasm from a niche concept to a societal tipping point, an organization must inspire those early believers. It cannot simply manipulate them with incentives, because a bribed endorsement is inherently inauthentic and instantly destroys trust. The movement must be genuine. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood before 250,000 people in Washington, D.C., he did not achieve that monumental gathering by distributing 250,000 invitations detailing a legislative agenda. He drew that crowd because he preached an unwavering belief in a different version of America. He inspired those who shared his vision to mobilize, and they, in turn, influenced their communities. They were not manipulated into attending. They were drawn by a profound, shared conviction. When a leader or an organization can clearly articulate their why, they attract a following not of customers or employees, but of believers, and it is the collective energy of those believers that possesses the power to tip a market, transform an industry, and truly change the world. Chapter 7. How a Tipping Point Tips. There is a precise mathematical principle that governs how new ideas, technologies, and movements spread through human populations. This is not a modern marketing theory, nor is it a speculative social construct. It is a well-documented sociological phenomenon known as the law of diffusion of innovations. First articulated in the mid-20th century to explain the adoption of agricultural advancements, the law forms a standard bell curve that neatly categorizes the population into 5 distinct segments, dictating the exact trajectory an idea must travel to achieve mass market acceptance. Understanding this curve is the absolute key to understanding how a tipping point is reached, and conversely, why so many seemingly brilliant ideas stall and eventually vanish into obscurity. At the extreme left of the curve, representing a mere 2.5% of the population, sit the innovators. These are the relentless visionary thinkers, the individuals whose primary motivation is to relentlessly push boundaries and challenge the existing state of affairs. They are deeply intuitive, completely undeterred by the risk of failure, and heavily invested in the discovery of the new. Adjoining them is the next 13.5%, a group classified as the early adopters. Like the innovators, early adopters are quick to embrace new concepts, but they are slightly less focused on creating the innovation themselves and more interested in leveraging it to gain an advantage or to perfectly express their own internal beliefs. They are the individuals who willingly endure profound inconvenience, pay exorbitant premiums, and suffer through the inevitable bugs of a first-generation product. They do not behave this way because the product is flawless. They do it because owning the product or participating in the movement serves as a tangible validation of their own worldview. Their purchase is not a transaction. It is a deeply personal declaration of identity. Moving further along the curve, we encounter the massive center, the early majority and the late majority, each comprising roughly 34% of the population. This combined 68% represents the ultimate prize for any organization or leader, the mass market. However, the individuals residing in the majority operate on an entirely different psychological frequency than those on the left side of the curve. The majority is fundamentally practical and highly risk-averse. They do not care about the visionary potential of an idea. They care about its proven, reliable utility. They demand established standards, reliable support networks, and most crucially, social proof. The defining characteristic of the mass market is that they will almost never adopt a new behavior or purchase a novel product until someone else has tested it first. Finally, resting at the extreme right of the curve is the remaining 16%, known as the laggards. This demographic adopts new technologies or ideas only when they are left with absolutely no other alternative, such as buying a touchscreen mobile phone simply because rotary dial models are no longer manufactured. They are irrelevant to the growth of a movement. The ultimate goal for any ambitious organization is to capture the vast, profitable expanse of the early and late majority. However, a profound and perilous chasm exists between the early adopters and the early majority. This gap represents the graveyard of countless startups, brilliant inventions, and political campaigns. The failure occurs because organizations mistakenly attempt to market their revolutionary ideas directly to the practical-minded middle. They dilute their message, attempting to appeal to the risk-averse nature of the majority with complex lists of features, competitive pricing, and rational arguments. But the majority cannot be swayed by these tactics alone when the concept is entirely new. They are inherently cynical toward the unproven. If a company attempts to bridge this gap by aggressively dropping prices or offering massive incentives, they are merely relying on manipulation. While this might force a temporary spike in adoption, it completely fails to build a foundation of trust or loyalty, and the momentum inevitably collapses when the promotional budget is exhausted. To successfully cross the chasm and trigger a genuine tipping point, the entire trajectory of communication must be strictly disciplined. An organization must fiercely resist the temptation to court the massive middle and instead focus its entire energy entirely on the left side of the curve. The innovators and the early adopters. A tipping point, that magical moment when an idea catches fire and momentum becomes self-sustaining, mathematically occurs only when an idea penetrates between 15 and 18% of the market. This is the critical mass. The early adopters are the gatekeepers to the majority. Because the mass market demands social proof before taking action, they look to the left side of the curve for guidance. When the innovators and early adopters embrace an idea, not because of what the product does, but because of why it exists, their enthusiasm is authentic and entirely unbribed. They become passionate evangelists. It is their genuine organic endorsement that ultimately convinces the practical majority that the water is safe. If the early adopters are inspired by an organization's profound sense of purpose, they will gladly do the heavy lifting of carrying that message across the chasm. The tragic history of the TiVo Corporation serves as a flawless cautionary tale of how to completely ignore this biological and mathematical reality. When TiVo first launched its digital video recorder at the end of the 1990s, the product was an absolute technological marvel. It possessed the power to fundamentally alter how human beings consume media, effectively rendering the traditional television schedule obsolete. TiVo had a product of unimaginably high quality. They were extraordinarily well-funded, and they lacked any serious initial competition. By all conventional business metrics, they should have ushered in an immediate cultural revolution. Yet their initial market penetration was a catastrophic failure, and their stock price eventually plummeted. TiVo failed to tip because they communicated entirely from the outside of the golden circle. They attempted to pitch their revolutionary product directly to the mass market by explaining exactly what it did. Their marketing campaigns focused relentlessly on the features. It pauses live television, it rewinds broadcasts, it memorizes your viewing habits, and it skips commercials. To the practical, risk-averse early majority, this message was alienating. It sounded complicated, unnecessary, and mildly invasive. The mass market had no emotional context for these features, and lacking a clear understanding of why this machine existed, they simply ignored it. Imagine if TiVo had understood the law of diffusion of innovations. Imagine if they had communicated from the inside out, targeting only the visionaries and early adopters who inherently believed in challenging the status quo of media consumption. Their message could have been profoundly simple. If you are the kind of person who believes you should have total control over every aspect of your life, we have a machine for you. It pauses live TV, it skips commercials, and it memorizes your habits. In this scenario, The features are no longer just a confusing list of technical specifications. They become the tangible proof of a deeply held belief about personal autonomy. The early adopters, those who desperately wanted control, would have instinctively recognized the why. They would have embraced the technology passionately, eagerly, demonstrating it to their friends in the early majority, naturally bridging the chasm through trusted, personal recommendations. A tipping point cannot be forced through sheer financial force or relentless, feature-based marketing. It is a delicate, organic chain reaction. It requires the profound discipline to articulate a clear, inspiring belief and the patience to cultivate the fiercely loyal left side of the curve believers. Only when those individuals internalize the organization's purpose as their own does the idea gain the structural integrity required to sweep across the masses and change the world. Chapter 8. Start with why, but know how. Imagine the scene at a massive corporate summit where a chief executive bursts onto the stage with an earth-shattering roar. He sprints from one side of the platform to the other, pumping his fists, dripping with sweat, and screaming at the top of his lungs about how much he loves his company. The crowd feeds off this chaotic, folkloric display. They cheer, they rise to their feet, and they mirror the frantic excitement pouring from the stage. This is a flawless demonstration of how energy can powerfully motivate a room. It is a spectacle that successfully drives a crowd into a frenzy. Yet, a critical question lingers in the silence of the following morning. Does this spectacle possess the power to sustain a population's focus? When the screaming stops and the executive is no longer present to act as a human battery, the motivation inevitably dissipates. Energy is a blunt instrument. It is entirely visible, effortlessly measured, and incredibly easy to replicate. A sudden surge of adrenaline, a compelling financial bonus, or a charismatic display can undoubtedly force an immediate action, but it remains a fleeting manipulation. It cannot forge an enduring movement. Contrast this frantic display with a completely different archetype of leadership. Consider an executive who fits the profile of a socially awkward misfit. He does not yell. He does not sprint across stages. His demeanor is quiet, perhaps even perceived as timid. Yet, when he steps to a podium and begins to speak, the entire room falls into a hushed, reverent silence. Every individual hangs on his every word. He does not rely on volume to captivate his audience. Instead, he relies on an unyielding, profound optimism. This leader possesses an unwavering belief that even the most deeply entrenched, complex problems facing humanity can be solved. He envisions a reality where unnecessary obstacles are eradicated, allowing every individual to achieve their maximum potential. It is this profound optimism, this absolute clarity of purpose that draws people into his orbit. The audience does not merely applaud and return to their daily routines. They internalize his message. They carry his words in their minds for months, sometimes years, allowing his vision to shape their own decisions. This is the essence of charisma. While energy merely motivates, charisma possesses the rare, transcendent power to truly inspire. Charisma is elusive, impossible to quantify, and cannot be mimicked through theatrical tactics. It emanates exclusively from an absolute conviction in an ideal that is vastly larger than the leader himself. A leader with a clear cause commands unwavering loyalty. A leader armed only with energy commands only temporary attention. This deep-seated cause is the invisible thread that connects all a person's varied pursuits. The things we choose to do with our lives are simply the tangible vehicles we utilize to breathe life into our underlying purpose. An individual might stumble through different careers, perhaps abandoning the study of law to enter the world of marketing, but those professions do not define their core identity. They are merely the physical manifestations, the external choices that allow the internal belief to be realized. When the inner drive is completely balanced with the external actions, the specific industry or product becomes incidental. Developing software, launching a massive airline, or pioneering space exploration are all vastly different endeavors, yet they function identically as the physical proof of a deeply held philosophical stance. A true visionary does not simply build a company, they construct a mechanism to challenge the status quo, champion freedom, or elevate the human condition. Understanding how these grand visions actually take root requires shifting our perspective on the architecture of human influence. When viewed from above, the concept of a central belief radiating outward looks like a flat circle. However, when viewed from the side, it reveals itself to be a three-dimensional cone, functioning exactly like a megaphone. At the absolute apex of this cone sits the leader, the visionary who holds the crystal-clear cause. But a megaphone is entirely useless if it lacks volume. The leader cannot personally reach every corner of the market, nor can they individually organize the masses required to ignite a revolution. To amplify the message, the leader relies entirely on the layer directly beneath the apex, the individuals who inherently understand how to translate a philosophical dream into a structural reality. The base of the megaphone represents the tangible output, the products and services that the outside world actually interacts with. If the message flowing through the megaphone is fragmented or insincere, the market will only hear noise. But when the visionary at the top is perfectly supported by those who know how to build the infrastructure beneath them, the message resounds with deafening clarity. This dynamic exposes a fundamental truth about human collaboration. The optimists who envision a drastically transformed world are entirely dependent on the realists who know how to navigate the present. The visionaries possess overactive imaginations. They stare into the horizon and see possibilities that remain invisible to the practical majority. They are fueled by the absolute certainty that the impossible can be achieved. However, this visionary brilliance is frequently accompanied by a profound disconnect from the logistical demands of reality. Without a grounding force, these individuals often end up as starving idealists, brilliant minds overflowing with world-changing ideas that never materialize. They desperately need the builders, the individuals who operate firmly in the here and now. These builders are the architects of process, the masters of systems, and the pragmatic executors who can capture an abstract dream and construct the physical scaffolding required to sustain it. Neither archetype is inherently superior. They simply perceive and interact with the world through entirely different psychological lenses. Virtually every organization that has ascended to monumental heights and fundamentally altered the trajectory of society is built upon this exact partnership. A visionary mind may conceive of a revolutionary technology that empowers the common man, but it requires a brilliant engineer to sit in a garage and solder the circuits that make it function. A charismatic orator may stand before a crowd of hundreds of thousands painting a vivid picture of a unified nation, but that massive gathering would never occur without a brilliant organizer working relentlessly in the shadows to coordinate the logistics, secure the permits, and orchestrate the movement. A dreamer may imagine an empire of animated entertainment, but it requires a pragmatic sibling to manage the finances, build the merchandising arms, and keep the visionary from plunging into ruin. These partnerships are the engines of historical change. They are forged in absolute trust, frequently originating from family ties or deeply rooted childhood friendships, where identical upbringings guarantee a seamlessly aligned worldview. The visionary trusts the builder to manage the reality, and the builder is deeply inspired to construct a monument to the visionary's cause. This symbiotic relationship dictates the difference between merely operating a successful business and truly leading an enduring movement. There are countless brilliant executives capable of managing massive corporate structures, optimizing supply chains, and driving immense profitability. They will achieve significant wealth and command deep respect, but they will spend their entire existences running their companies. To build an organization that transcends the lifespan of its founders requires a completely different hierarchy. The highest echelon of leadership must be occupied by an individual who wakes up every morning to champion a cause, not to study a balance sheet. The operational leaders, the structural geniuses beneath them, must possess the profound strength of ego to acknowledge that they are not the visionaries themselves. They must find their deepest fulfillment not in standing under the spotlight, but in the intricate, vital work of building the machinery that makes the spotlight shine. When this precise equilibrium is achieved, the organization ceases to be a mere corporate entity and transforms into a cathedral, enduring long after the original architects have faded into history. Chapter 9. Know why. Know how. Then what? As an organization scales and achieves a degree of success, a profound physical separation inevitably occurs. In the nascent, early days of a company, the visionary founder at the top of the megaphone is intimately connected to the base. They can personally interact with every customer, personally train every new hire, and infuse every transaction with their own passionate belief. But success breeds volume, and volume demands infrastructure. The leader can no longer be physically present in every storefront, on every customer service call, or in every boardroom meeting. The sheer, overwhelming size of the operation dictates that the visionary must rely entirely on the tangible outputs of the organization to serve as their proxy. The products, the marketing campaigns, the corporate policies, and the frontline employees become the only voice the outside world hears. If these physical manifestations, the whats, do not perfectly and consistently echo the underlying purpose, the message is instantly diluted. A powerful, inspiring movement rapidly degrades into the chaotic, uninspiring noise of a standard corporation. The critical challenge for any expanding entity or any individual seeking to build a lasting impact is determining how to evaluate the endless, chaotic stream of opportunities, advice, and potential directions that flood in every single day. The business landscape is densely packed with highly educated experts, consultants, and well-meaning peers who are eager to offer their perfectly rational opinions on what an organization must do to survive or dominate. One expert might present flawless data, insisting that the key to modern success is aggressive expansion into a new demographic. Another might argue passionately for a massive price reduction to capture market share. A third might champion the acquisition of a smaller, agile competitor. All of this advice might be empirically correct. It might be based on perfectly sound, rational market research. But if an organization lacks a definitive internal filter, this barrage of expert opinion leads directly to strategic paralysis, or worse, a fractured and contradictory identity. To truly comprehend the danger of operating without this internal filter, imagine a routine trip to a massive supermarket. As you wander down the aisles, you are approached by 4 distinct, highly respected experts. The first expert stops you and insists that a specific brand of chocolate candy is the ultimate indulgence, providing compelling evidence that you absolutely must buy it. A few aisles later, a second expert presents a flawless argument that a specific brand of almond milk is revolutionizing human nutrition. Soon after, a third expert swears that cookies are the absolute essential bedrock for morale and daily happiness. Finally, a fourth expert looks you in the eye and insists that organic celery is the sole foundation of a long, healthy life. If you entered that supermarket lacking a clear guiding purpose, if you did not know exactly why you were shopping, the rational response is to listen to all these respected voices. After all, they are experts. You proceed to place the chocolate, the almond milk, the cookies, and the celery into your shopping cart. When you arrive at the checkout counter, 2 distinct, damaging realities emerge. First, you have expended an exorbitant amount of money and time acquiring items you did not inherently need, driven purely by the persuasive power of external influence rather than your own internal intention. Second, and far more devastating to your long-term success, consider what your shopping cart now communicates to the outside world. If a stranger were to observe the contents of your basket, a chaotic, contradictory mix of sugary junk food and organic health food, they would have absolutely no idea what you believe or what you stand for. Your tangible output is a complete contradiction. You have failed to project any clear, recognizable identity. Now, introduce a crystal clear why to this exact same scenario. Imagine that before you even stepped foot inside that supermarket, your foundational belief, your unyielding driving purpose, was the absolute pursuit of physical health and vitality. This single internal belief fundamentally alters how you interact with the external environment. As you walk down the aisles, the exact same experts are still there. They offer the exact same highly compelling advice. However, your response mechanism is entirely transformed. You listen to the passionate pitch for the chocolate candy and the cookies, but you instantly recognize that they do not align with your core belief. You confidently, without hesitation, walk right past them. You arrive at the almond milk and the celery, recognizing immediately that these items perfectly manifest your pursuit of health. You place only those two items in your cart. The consequences of this focused, filtered approach are monumental. You have conserved your resources, spending your time and capital only on what genuinely matters to your cause. More importantly, you have achieved absolute visual and conceptual clarity. When that same stranger observes your shopping cart at the checkout, the message is unmistakable. Without you uttering a single syllable, the observer can look at the celery and the almond milk and instantly, inherently understand your core values. Your tangible whats have perfectly communicated your invisible why. You have achieved complete authenticity. This mechanism is the celery test, and it serves as the ultimate metric by which every organizational decision must be measured. When a company clearly understands its profound purpose, the celery test acts as an impenetrable shield against the seductive yet ultimately destructive opportunities that constantly threaten to lead companies astray. Every potential partnership, every new product line, every marketing campaign, and every potential hire must be ruthlessly subjected to this filter. If a proposed action does not pass the celery test, if it does not serve as a perfect, tangible proof of the organization's central belief, it must be discarded, regardless of how lucrative or popular it might appear in the short term. Organizations that rely on the manipulative tactics of carrots and sticks frequently fail this test precisely because they possess no internal filter. They chase every fleeting market trend, adopt contradictory strategies, and constantly contort their identity to match the prevailing winds of consumer demand. Their corporate shopping carts are overflowing with mismatched, confusing initiatives, leaving the consumer entirely bewildered as to what the brand actually stands for. In their desperate attempt to appeal to everyone, they end up meaning nothing to anyone. Conversely, the leaders and organizations that inspire deep, enduring loyalty are uncompromising in their application of the celery test. They possess the profound, often painful discipline to reject highly profitable ventures simply because those ventures do not align with their core values. They understand a fundamental truth of enduring success. A short-term financial gain is never worth the long-term destruction of authenticity. When every product, every service, and every corporate action clearly and consistently passes the celery test, the megaphone operates at maximum volume. The market can look at everything the organization does and instantly recognize its profound, unwavering belief. This is the precise moment when a company stops merely selling a commodity and begins broadcasting a movement. Chapter 10. Communication is not about speaking, it's about listening. Human beings are inherently visual creatures. We rely heavily on our physical senses to navigate the world and to comprehend our place within it, because our deepest beliefs and most profound driving forces reside within the limbic brain, a region completely devoid of the capacity for language. We constantly seek physical, tangible manifestations to express those silent convictions. We desperately need symbols. Throughout history, flags, religious icons, and architectural monuments have served as physical vessels for intangible ideals. A piece of cloth with specific colors and geometric patterns possesses absolutely no inherent value on its own. Yet when that cloth is stitched into a national flag, it becomes a powerful emblem of shared history, collective sacrifice, and common identity. People are willing to weep for it, fight for it, and even die for it. The profound power doesn't lie in the physical material, it lies entirely in the invisible belief that the material represents. In the modern economic landscape, the exact same principle applies to the concept of a logo. A corporate logo, in its purest, most literal sense, is nothing more than a few strokes of ink on a page, a clever arrangement of typography, or an illuminated shape on a digital screen. By default, a logo is merely a trademark. It serves the practical, utilitarian function of identifying the commercial source of a product, allowing a consumer to distinguish between a pair of shoes manufactured by one company and a pair manufactured by another. However, when an organization possesses absolute clarity of purpose, when its WHY is universally understood and rigorously demonstrated through the disciplined consistency of its actions, its logo undergoes a profound transformation. It ceases to be a mere trademark and ascends to the status of a true symbol. The ultimate, undeniable proof of this transformation is witnessed when individuals voluntarily, permanently mark their physical bodies with a corporate identity. Consider the phenomenon of the Harley-Davidson tattoo. There are countless individuals who have the Harley-Davidson shield proudly inked into their skin. To the uninitiated, this behavior is utterly baffling. Why would a rational human being permanently brand themselves with the logo of a motorcycle manufacturer? The answer lies in the profound resonance of the symbol. Harley-Davidson does not merely manufacture heavy machinery. They champion a deeply ingrained American belief in rugged individualism, rebellion, and the freedom of the open road. The people who tattoo that logo onto their arms are not doing it to provide free advertising for a corporation. They are doing it for themselves. The logo has become a symbol of their own identity. It is a visual shorthand that allows them to boldly declare to the world exactly who they are and what they believe, without ever having to utter a single syllable. This level of intense personal identification is impossible to achieve if an organization's communication flows strictly from the outside in. If a company's identity is built entirely upon its what's, its features, its price points, and its promotional discounts, its logo will never mean anything beyond the utilitarian product it represents. No one tattoos the logo of a discount retail chain or a generic battery manufacturer onto their body, because those logos carry no philosophical weight. They do not represent a cause. They offer the consumer no opportunity to express their own core values. A symbol can only exist when there is absolute clarity of belief. If the WHY is fuzzy, the logo remains just a logo. This dynamic reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of communication. We frequently assume that communication is synonymous with speaking. We equate the sheer volume of marketing messages, the frequency of corporate press releases, and the reach of an advertising campaign with effective communication. But broadcasting is not communicating. True communication is a two-way process. It is not defined by what the speaker says. It is defined by what the listener actually hears and understands. If an organization yells into the megaphone, but the message is a chaotic, contradictory jumble of features and benefits, the market hears nothing but noise. The listener is left confused, unable to decipher the core identity of the entity speaking to them. When a company communicates from the inside out, the dynamic shifts entirely. The organization articulates its deep-seated belief and then meticulously ensures that every tangible product, every customer service interaction, and every marketing campaign perfectly reflects that belief. When the listener interacts with those consistent whats, they intuitively grasp the underlying why. They hear the message clearly, not because it was shouted the loudest, but because it resonated with their own internal frequency. The company has essentially provided the listener with a vocabulary, both verbal and visual, to articulate their own worldview. Consider the illuminated bitten apple on the lid of a laptop computer. It is not placed there merely for aesthetic appeal. It is oriented to face the outside world when the machine is open. When an individual sits in a crowded coffee shop working on that specific machine, that glowing logo acts as a silent beacon. It communicates something profound about the user to every single person in the room. It signals that the user aligns themselves with the ideals of creative rebellion, of thinking differently, and of challenging the conventional norms. The user has adopted the corporate symbol to amplify their own personal identity. The company did not have to speak to the rest of the coffee shop. The user did the speaking on their behalf, simply by wielding the symbol. This is why consistency is absolutely critical. A symbol is incredibly fragile. It derives its power entirely from the unwavering alignment of the golden circle. If an organization with a deeply beloved symbol suddenly acts in a manner that contradicts its core belief, if it releases a product that violates its own standards, or if its leadership behaves unethically, the symbol is instantly tarnished. The market feels betrayed, not just because a product failed, but because a belief was compromised. The listener perceives the hypocrisy immediately, and the logo reverts back to being a meaningless trademark. To truly communicate, a leader and an organization must learn to listen. They must not merely listen to market research or the demands of focus groups seeking superficial features. They must listen to the resonance of their own beliefs within the culture. They must observe whether their followers are using their products and symbols to express their own identities. When an organization sees its own core values reflected back by the fiercely loyal actions of its employees and its customers, it knows that true communication has occurred. The message has been received, the belief has been shared, and the symbol has been brought to life. Chapter 11. When Why Goes Fuzzy. There is a profound paradox hidden within the architecture of achievement. The very momentum that propels an organization to greatness often harbors the seeds of its eventual stagnation. In the earliest days of any ambitious endeavor, survival is the singular, overarching metric. The visionary at the helm is driven by a burning, unyielding conviction, and the entire structure is small enough that this central belief can be felt intimately by every individual involved. There is a visceral connection to the cause, but as the enterprise scales, as survival gives way to prosperity, a subtle and dangerous shift begins to occur. The sheer volume of operations demands a relentless focus on the tangible. The expanding infrastructure, the logistical complexities, and the ballooning balance sheets. The metrics of success invariably transition from the abstract measurement of cultural impact to the rigid, numerical tracking of revenue and market share. The what begins to overshadow the why. This transition is rarely a sudden, deliberate betrayal of the founding principles. Rather, it is a slow, imperceptible erosion of clarity. As the megaphone of the organization grows larger and louder, the distance between the visionary at the apex and the individuals at the base widens exponentially. The founder can no longer be physically present to infuse every decision and every interaction with their philosophical compass. They are forced to rely on layers of management and systems of protocol to translate their belief into action. If that central purpose is not fiercely guarded and systematically integrated into the hiring and training processes, the new generation of leadership will inevitably fixate on the most visible aspects of the company's success, the what and the how. They will inherit a massively profitable machine, but they will lack the profound understanding of why that machine was built in the first place. When this happens, the clarity of the organization becomes muddy, the compass is lost, and the entity begins to navigate solely by the shifting winds of the market. Perhaps no modern corporate narrative illustrates this tragedy of success more vividly than the trajectory of Walmart. When Sam Walton established his first retail store, he was not pioneering the concept of discount shopping. The model already existed. What Walton introduced to the market was not a novel operational strategy, but a profoundly deep-seated belief in the value of human connection and community support. He was driven by an unyielding conviction that if a business prioritized the well-being of the everyday citizen, if it genuinely looked out for the working class and the communities they inhabited, success would naturally follow. His obsession was not with cheap merchandise, his obsession was with service. The low prices and the sprawling stores were merely the physical manifestations, the tangible whats, that allowed him to bring his internal why to life. During Walton's tenure, this belief permeated every facet of the organization. He famously insisted that executives spend significant time on the floor, interacting with employees and customers, ensuring that the corporate hierarchy never lost touch with the humanity of their operation. The culture was fiercely loyal, and the employees genuinely believed they were participating in a cause that elevated their own communities. But after Walton's passing, a monumental shift in perspective occurred. The subsequent leadership inherited a colossal, unparalleled logistical empire, but they failed to inherit, or perhaps failed to understand, the underlying philosophy. They looked at the staggering success of the company and mistakenly concluded that the primary objective was simply to deliver the lowest possible price. They confused the tangible result of the founder's belief with the belief itself. Without the guiding light of Walton's original purpose, the culture within the retail giant began to warp. The pursuit of the lowest price, completely divorced from the desire to serve the community, devolved into a ruthless, cutthroat mandate. Suppliers were squeezed mercilessly, local economies were often decimated by the aggressive expansion tactics, and most distressingly, the very employees that Walton had championed were subjected to poor treatment and diminishing compensation. The company continued to grow, its revenue dwarfing the gross domestic product of entire nations, but the soul of the organization had fractured. The external communication lost its inspirational resonance and became a blunt, repetitive manipulation focused solely on cheap goods. This colossal entity, seemingly invincible and dominating the global landscape, eventually found itself staggering under a barrage of public outrage and internal dissent. The giant flinched. Relentless negative press, massive class action lawsuits regarding employee treatment, and fierce resistance from communities refusing to allow the retailer within their borders became the new defining characteristics of the brand. The immense size and operational brilliance of the corporation could no longer shield it from the consequences of losing its foundational belief. They had become a target, painted not by the quality of their logistics, but by the degradation of their character. When a dominant force in any industry begins to stumble in this manner, it is almost never because they have forgotten how to manufacture a product or deliver a service. They stumble because they have forgotten why they started in the first place. The executives at the helm, trained entirely in the arts of management and finance, deploy armies of public relations experts to repair the damage, treating the cultural crisis as a mere messaging problem to be solved with a clever new advertising campaign. But a fractured why cannot be repaired with a new slogan. The public backlash and the loss of trust are not reactions to a poor marketing strategy. They are visceral, limbic responses to a profound lack of authenticity. This is the ultimate danger of success, when the metrics of achievement are solely defined by the tangible and the measurable. An organization becomes vulnerable to its own growth. The challenge is not merely to build a massive enterprise. The true test of leadership is to ensure that as the enterprise expands, the original, invisible conviction that sparked its creation remains the unwavering standard by which every single subsequent decision is measured. If the WHY is allowed to go fuzzy, even the most impenetrable empires will eventually crack. Chapter 12. Split happens. Every organization, no matter how profoundly inspired its origins, eventually faces a terrifying and largely inevitable point of fracture. In the beginning, the relationship between the founder's underlying belief and the company's tangible output is incredibly tight. The visionary is intimately involved in every decision, ensuring that every product and every hire is a perfect reflection of the core cause. However, as the organization achieves success, it naturally begins to grow. The infrastructure expands, the employee count multiplies, and the volume of products entering the market surges. This growth necessitates layers of management and complex operational systems. The sheer weight of the tangible what's becomes massive, requiring immense time and capital to maintain. It is exactly at this juncture, amidst the intoxicating rush of profound success, that the split occurs. The physical manifestation of the company becomes so large that it eclipses the intangible philosophy that birthed it. The megaphone fractures. The manifestation of this split is often subtle at first. It begins when the primary metric of organizational health shifts from the measurement of cultural impact to the strict, uncompromising measurement of revenue. Money is a tangible, universally understood metric. It is incredibly easy to track on a spreadsheet. Conversely, belief, inspiration, and trust are notoriously difficult to quantify. As the visionary at the apex of the organization is pushed further and further away from the daily operations by the expanding layers of bureaucracy, the individuals managing the base of the megaphone. The realists and the operators naturally gravitate toward the metrics they can actually see and control. The company stops viewing money as the essential fuel required to advance a higher cause and slowly begins to view the money itself as the ultimate cause. The what is completely divorced from the why. This fracture is violently exposed when the founding visionary eventually departs the organization. No leader is immortal, and whether the departure is due to retirement, resignation, or tragedy, the transition of power represents the ultimate vulnerability for a cause-driven enterprise. This vulnerability is perfectly encapsulated by the school bus test. The premise is stark. If the visionary founder were to be tragically struck by a school bus tomorrow, would the foundational belief of the organization survive? If the WHY is housed exclusively within the mind of a single charismatic leader and has not been meticulously extracted and embedded into the corporate culture, the organization will instantly lose its compass the moment that leader is gone. When a visionary departs, the board of directors is inevitably tasked with finding a successor. In almost every instance, they look to the outside world for a seasoned executive, an individual with a flawless resume built upon a foundation of operational efficiency and financial growth. They hire a master of the what and the how. They hire a builder to replace an architect. The new executive arrives and immediately applies conventional business logic to an unconventional entity. They look at the balance sheets, analyze the market share, and mandate immediate strategic shifts to optimize profitability. Because they do not possess the founder's gut-level intuition for the underlying cause, they cannot use the celery test. Every decision becomes a calculated reaction to the market, rather than a proactive defense of a belief. The tragic era of Apple Computer following the ousting of Steve Jobs in the mid-1980s serves as a perfect historical monument to the devastation of the split. Jobs was not merely a CEO, he was the physical embodiment of the company's rebellious, anti-establishment why. When he was removed, the company was handed over to a succession of highly capable, traditionally trained executives. These men were brilliant operators, but they did not share Jobs' profound vision. They looked at Apple and saw nothing more than a company that manufactured computers. They attempted to compete on the standard, uninspiring metrics of price, processing speed, and market share against massive corporate rivals. Stripped of its cause, the company lost its soul. The fiercely loyal culture eroded, the products became confusing and ordinary, and the brand plummeted toward the brink of absolute bankruptcy. It was only when Jobs returned over a decade later, bringing the central belief back to the apex of the megaphone, that the company resurrected itself, not by inventing better spreadsheets, but by remembering its original purpose. A similar profound crisis of identity strikes countless organizations when the original architect steps down. When an organization forgets its why, it fundamentally alters its relationship with the outside world. It must abandon inspiration and rely entirely on manipulation. The marketing budgets must explode to fund endless promotions, cashback incentives, and fear-based advertising, simply because the company no longer possesses the organic magnetic pull of a shared belief. The fiercely loyal early adopters vanish, recognizing the loss of authenticity, leaving the company to desperately bribe the fickle mass market. The company may survive, and through sheer operational brute force it may even maintain a degree of profitability, but it ceases to be a movement. It becomes just another corporation fighting a brutal, exhausting, and endless war for incremental gains in a commoditized marketplace. To survive the split, an organization must achieve a monumental feat. It must learn to measure the invisible. The leadership must find ways to systematically quantify the strength of their culture and the clarity of their cause. The WHY must be treated not as a quaint founding myth, but as the absolute, non-negotiable constitution of the enterprise. Every subsequent leader must be chosen not merely for their ability to manage a balance sheet, but for their profound, undeniable devotion to the original cause. The ultimate success of a visionary leader is not measured by the size of the empire they build during their tenure, but by the ability of that empire to continue inspiring the world long after they are gone. Chapter 13. The Origins of a Why. The pursuit of a foundational purpose is frequently misunderstood as an exercise in creative invention. When organizations finally recognize the immense power of operating from the inside out, their immediate instinct is often to manufacture a compelling narrative. They gather their executives in boardrooms, hire expensive brand consultants, and pore over mountains of market research, desperately trying to synthesize a core belief that will perfectly resonate with their target demographic. They treat the WHY as if it were a clever marketing slogan waiting to be brainstormed and focus grouped into existence. But a true, authentic purpose cannot be fabricated in a conference room. It is not born from a strategic analysis of the competitive landscape or a desire to capture a new market segment. A why is never invented. It is exclusively discovered. The process of finding this central belief is fundamentally an archaeological dig. It requires turning away from the future, ignoring the immediate demands of the market, and looking profoundly backward into the past. For an organization, the WHY is invariably tethered to the origin story of its founder. It is the culmination of the founder's deeply held convictions, shaped and solidified long before the enterprise was ever formally incorporated. When the pioneers of the personal computing revolution began soldering circuit boards in a garage, they were not inventing a new philosophy. They were simply building a tangible machine that perfectly manifested the anti-establishment, individual empowerment ethos they had absorbed during their youth. Their belief existed completely independent of the technology. The company they built was merely the chosen vehicle to broadcast that pre-existing, deeply rooted belief to the world. This biological and psychological reality applies equally to individuals seeking their own personal purpose. By the time a human being reaches their late teenage years or early adulthood, their core why is fully formed and firmly cemented within their limbic brain. It is the sum total of their childhood experiences, the values instilled by their upbringing, the early challenges they endured, and the fundamental lessons they absorbed about how the world operates. The individual does not need to search the horizon for their calling or wait for an external epiphany to strike. They need to meticulously excavate their own history. The journey to unearthing this hidden architecture often requires reaching a point of profound friction, exhaustion, or failure. When an individual or an organization loses their connection to their underlying purpose, they enter a state of painful misalignment. The external actions, the daily tasks, and the tangible outputs no longer reflect the internal belief. This dissonance generates a powerful, draining psychological friction. Even if the superficial markers of success, wealth, elevated status, or dominant market share remain entirely intact, the internal landscape feels completely hollow. The passion evaporates, replaced by a grueling, mechanical routine of survival. The work that once sparked joy becomes an endless, heavy burden. This precise state of profound disillusionment is often the necessary catalyst for discovery. It forces a pause and demands introspection. To find the why, one must systematically analyze the high and low points of their life or their organization's history. It requires identifying the moments of absolute, effortless alignment, the times when the work felt deeply fulfilling, when the culture hummed with energy, and when the impact felt profound, and contrasting those with the moments of deepest frustration and failure. When these disparate historical data points are laid out and examined with brutal, unflinching honesty, a definitive pattern emerges. The WHY is the invisible thread that connects all the moments of genuine resonance. It is the underlying, unified theme that explains exactly why certain environments and decisions led to immense joy and success, and why others led to misery. Because the WHY resides in the emotional, languageless center of the brain, the process of articulation is remarkably difficult. It requires translating profound emotional patterns into clear, actionable words that the neocortex can understand and communicate. This vital translation is rarely achieved in total isolation. It frequently requires an external perspective, a trusted partner, a deeply perceptive colleague, or an objective observer who can listen to the stories, identify the recurring themes that the individual is too close to see, and help distill the raw emotion into a tangible, defining statement. Once this profound discovery is made, and the words are finally spoken aloud and recognized as undeniable truth, The effect is immediate and deeply visceral. The individual or the organization experiences a profound sense of relief and clarity. The internal compass is permanently reset. The chaos of infinite choices and strategic possibilities is instantly reduced because the internal filter is finally understood. They no longer have to guess what their next move should be or rely on external manipulation to force a result. They simply have to look at their newly excavated belief and ensure that every single subsequent action they take in the physical world is a perfect, undeniable reflection of it. Chapter 14. The New Competition. The crack of a starting pistol echoes across a muddy field, and a massive pack of high school cross-country runners surges forward. In any standard race, the dynamic is universally understood. Every individual is running against the person next to them. They are fiercely tracking the pace of their rivals, looking over their shoulders, calculating their stamina against the runner just ahead, and pushing their bodies to the absolute limit in a desperate bid to cross the finish line first. It is the purest, most elemental form of competition. However, in this particular race, there is a runner named Ben Coleman, and his presence fundamentally alters the entire psychological landscape of the event. Ben possesses a profound physical disadvantage. He was born with cerebral palsy. The neurological condition affects his movement, his balance, and his muscle tone, while the other runners possess fluid, athletic strides. Ben's gait is arduous and mechanically inefficient. As the pack rapidly disappears into the distance, Ben is left far behind, struggling with every single step. The terrain is brutal. He frequently loses his balance, tumbling hard onto the unforgiving ground. He slips in the mud, scuffing his knees and hands. He bleeds. He hurts. Yet every single time he falls, a remarkable sequence of events occurs. He slowly, painstakingly forces himself back to his feet, and he continues to run. Long after the elite runners have sprinted across the finish line, collected their breath, and begun to socialize, Ben is still out on the course, fighting a solitary battle against his own physical limitations. He is completely removed from the conventional race. He has absolutely no chance of winning a medal, no chance of defeating another runner, and no chance of achieving a recognizable athletic glory. But as Ben finally rounds the last corner and the finish line comes into view, something profound happens. The runners who had finished the race 20 or 30 minutes earlier, the very individuals who had just been locked in a fierce, hyper-competitive struggle against one another, do not simply watch him from the sidelines. They walk back onto the muddy course. They surround Ben, and together they run alongside him for the final stretch. When Ben finally crosses the finish line, bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, he is flanked by a massive crowd of his supposed rivals, all cheering for his success. This incredible scene exposes a profound, unyielding truth about human nature and the mechanics of ambition. When you compete against everyone else, no one wants to help you. But when you compete against yourself, everyone wants to help you. The conventional business world operates almost entirely on the model of the initial sprint. Organizations are obsessed with the runners next to them. Executives spend vast fortunes and countless hours obsessively tracking their competitors, analyzing their features, monitoring their pricing strategies, and plotting aggressive maneuvers to capture an incremental fraction of market share. They show up to the race every single day, consumed by a singular zero-sum objective: to beat the other guy. This relentless outward focus inevitably breeds a corporate culture of paranoia, manipulation, and reactionary decision-making. If a competitor drops their price, the organization panics and slashes their own. If a rival introduces a flashy new feature, the organization scrambles to reverse engineer it and release a slightly faster version. They are locked in an exhausting, endless cycle of comparing their whats and their hows against the rest of the pack. This hyper-competitive environment creates a structural fragility. When an organization's entire identity is defined by simply being better than a rival, its existence is entirely dependent on the presence of that rival. The motivation is entirely external. This is why so many dominant companies violently lose their footing the moment a truly disruptive, unprecedented innovation enters the market, because they spent their entire existence looking sideways at their traditional competitors. They completely missed the visionary threat approaching from a completely different direction. They were so busy trying to win the race that they failed to realize the course had fundamentally changed. Now, imagine an organization that operates with the profound internal clarity of Ben Coman. Imagine a company that wakes up every morning completely unconcerned with the chaotic movements of the pack. This organization possesses a crystal clear why. They understand their foundational belief, and they have established a rigorous discipline of how to bring that belief to life. When they step up to the starting line, they are not looking sideways. They are looking inward at their own compass and forward at their own vision. Their primary objective is not to defeat a rival. Their primary objective is to outdo themselves. The critical questions they ask are fundamentally different. They do not ask, how can we beat the competition's new product? Instead, they ask, are we a better version of ourselves today than we were yesterday? Is the product we are releasing this month a more accurate, more perfect physical manifestation of our core belief than the product we released a year ago? Are we advancing our cause? When an organization shifts its focus from beating the competition to advancing its own foundational purpose, it ceases to play a finite game and enters an infinite one. This internal competition is the ultimate crucible for true, enduring innovation. It liberates the organization from the suffocating pressure of reactionary tactics. They no longer have to rely on the manipulative carrots and sticks of price drops and promotional gimmicks, because they are not trying to bribe a customer away from a rival. They are simply striving to be the absolute best version of themselves. When a leader and an organization embody this profound level of authenticity, the market response mirrors the climax of the cross-country race. Customers, employees, and even the broader society recognize the genuine struggle for excellence and the unwavering commitment to a cause. They see an entity that is not merely trying to extract wealth from a transaction, but is fighting to bring a meaningful belief into the physical world. And just as the other runners return to the course to run alongside Ben, the market rallies around these visionary organizations. People are drawn to them, fiercely defending them during missteps, willingly paying premiums for their products, and actively championing their message. Every single organization, from the smallest local storefront to the most sprawling global conglomerate, started with a why. At the moment of their inception, there was a founder who possessed a spark of belief, a desire to solve a problem, or a vision for a slightly better reality. The challenge is not merely discovering that purpose. The ultimate challenge is maintaining it. The true test of greatness is the ability to fiercely protect the clarity of that belief as the organization scales, as the pressures of the market intensify, and as the sirens of short-term profitability attempt to lure the leadership off course. The goal is not to wake up and obsess over how to conquer the world. The goal is to wake up and figure out how to inspire the world just a little bit more effectively than you did the day before. When that becomes the sole metric of success, the competition becomes utterly irrelevant. The only true rival is the organization's own past, and the only true prize is the enduring, unshakable loyalty of those who believe what they believe.